European history is one of carve-ups, partitions and cynical alliances. The Nazi-Soviet Pact in 1939 was just one in this series. And it wasn't just Eastern Europe that was partitioned, but later it was history itself. So, when we learn of such a cynical alliance, we're always shocked. But really, should we be? Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
The 20 years between World War I and II, though largely peaceful, was plagued by diplomatic tensions and aggressive posturing. The 1919 Treaty of Versailles, signed by Germany and the Allied powers, outright forbid Berlin from militarization in a bid to secure peace on the old continent. While the treaty's proclamation worked for around 14 years, the Nazi Party's rise to power in 1935, with Adolf Hitler at its helm, became the beginning of the end of peace in Europe. At first secretly, with the help of the Soviet Union, and then officially in 1935, Hitler pursued an ambitious and wholly illegal rearmament program, defying the rules laid out by the Versailles Treaty through the reintroduction of conscription, the expansion of the Wehrmacht, and the creation of the Luftwaffe. Disguised as safety precautions, Nazi Germany's military revival was largely met with appeasement from France and Britain, still haunted by the devastation of World War I, who hoped concessions might prevent another catastrophe. As for the field of diplomacy, Adolf Hitler found a strong ally just 3 years after taking over Germany: Italy and its dictator Benito Mussolini. The two powers would set their alliance in stone through the 1939 Pact of Steel. Meanwhile, Great Britain and France went on to sign a mutual defense pact with Poland, pledging support in the event of an attack. Caught between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, still resentful over their defeat in the 1920 Polish-Soviet War, Poland, with its outdated army and strategy still rooted in the ways of the First World War, found itself between a rock and a hard place. However, Poland's fate was not sealed until Berlin and Moscow found common ground through the signing of a pact that would ultimately see the recently revived Second Polish Republic once again wiped off the map.
I'm delighted to be joined by our guest, Alina Nowobilska, independent historian based here in Warsaw and a great friend of the programme. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I love coming on your show.
Great to have you. Yes, the Ribbentrop Molotov Pact. We'll go back to after the First World War, and the climate of dictatorship versus democracy. It seemed that dictatorship seemed to have some sort of traction, and these two powers, the Soviet Union and post-imperial Germany, seemed to have grounds for grievance against the Versailles order. So tell us about how these two powers worked during this time. On the face of it, they were antithetical, but yet they had common ground.
They do. They're both very, very angry that Poland has gained its own independence. Poland's taken away land. They have taken away soldiers from them, which is very important. You need that manpower. As we saw in the clip earlier, Hitler's already rearming pretty quickly after taking power in 1933, building various different weaponry. They're helping each other, the Soviet Union and Germany, at the end of the day. They're all rearming themselves. They're annoyed, they're angry, they're resentful. They want what they want, and they want it now. Germany's also desperate for things like resources, for example. They don't have enough to be able to complete all their productions. And who has resources? The Soviet Union. So, of course, you're going to go in partnership with somebody who's going to give you those resources. Also say to you, oh, well, do you know what? If we invade here and you invade here, we'll kind of split up that land too that we're owed. You know, Poland doesn't need to exist. It shouldn't exist.
Yeah, so it was rather colourful language was used to describe Poland, wasn't it, after the Versailles?
we're not going to use it. We're on live TV, so we're not going to be using any of this colourful language. But yes, there was a lot of anger towards Poland, especially Piłsudski. I mean, we've talked about Piłsudski before on your show, that how powerful of a man he was, and Hitler was intimidated by him. And I think Stalin, to a certain point, after 1920, for example, and the Battle of Warsaw. So, I don't know. Would they have done anything earlier? I don't think so. You
mentioned the idea of the reality governing the policy, but how did these two systems function together? One a communist system, another a kind of bourgeois republic. Did they hate each other during the time that they were cooperating? How did that work? Was it a big problem, I suppose?
I think Hitler more mistrusted the Soviet Union. Stalin himself, I don't know, he was a bit, I don't want to say this, he was a bit gullible, Stalin was, at this point, because when they make this pact, especially, I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself for 1941, but he didn't believe that Hitler would actually invade in 1941. And when Hitler invades, he's a little bit like, oh no, it's probably just a mistake, it's okay. And then he actually realises what's happening. So I think Stalin at this point, he is a little bit pie in the sky, thinking, you know, everything's all hunky-dory when it's really not. Hitler, on the other hand, I think was a little bit more aggressive to this. He didn't trust he's never trusted communism since the moment he started writing his manifestos and started speaking in 1923 during the Beer Putsch, for example. He hates the communists with a passion.
But despite that, the historians you read say there's more joins, and they're far more compatible than incompatible. Two authoritarian systems.
Yep.
Met in the middle. They learned from each other.
Well, they do. If you look at the occupations, for example, I know that's not what we're supposed to be talking about today, but if you look at the occupations, they're pretty much identical, where you have the destruction of the intelligentsia, for one. Both destroy the intelligentsia. There is the suppression of people. Both suppress people, both do mass arrests, both do mass murders in different ways, of course. So the Russians, the Soviets, they deport straight into the east, and the Germans, concentration camps and death camps and forced labour and things like that. They're more or less identical in the way they operate and the way they do things. Is there a difference? Their ideology is slightly different, but they're more or less the same thing.
Yes, look on the map. In the lead up, the late 30s, tensions rising in Europe. Poland is increasingly beleaguered, although it looks towards Britain and France for some sort of military support in case of anything. Can you give us outline us the picture of how Europe sped to this point where Hitler and Stalin have this seemingly surprising and shocking pact in August 1939.
Hitler, at this point, he's done a lot of land grabs, and the West is kind of like, oh no, but it's okay. Look, let's try and divert him to stop looking at like France and all of those areas, and maybe direct him towards the east a little bit more. We know Poland's taken a bit of land from Czechoslovakia, but that's fine. You know, it's that kind of ideology to stop him looking towards the West, because the West is, you know, according to the Allies, more important. The East, you know, it doesn't really matter.
So do they have the same viewpoint with regard to Eastern Europe as, say, Hitler did? You know, that it was some sort of illegitimate offspring of the Versailles Treaty? How did they look at Poland?
Poland's never really been, well, apart from, you know, the 15 and the 1600s when we had the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Poland's not really been that important, geographically important. It's so far away. I mean, even nowadays, people still travel. They still travel to Poland. They're like, wow, you know, this place is a little bit modern, isn't it? I'm like, well, yeah, you know, we don't live in the sticks with nothing. But at the end of the day, the Allies, even though they do this pact with Poland, do they really come and help at the end of the day? And I know other Western historians, and I've had this argument with them, where they're like, oh yeah, but we couldn't have done it, we couldn't have bought you supplies, we couldn't have helped. Actually, do you know what? You could have helped. There's lots of different ways you could have done it, you just didn't want to.
So what did Hitler gain by a pact with Russia, and what did Russia gain by a pact with Hitler? It was a very cynical alliance. They both knew that it couldn't last. I think it was Ribbentrop said, this pact will last 100 years, and Stalin said, well, hang on, let's make it 10. It's a bit more realistic. They both knew it had a finite, it had an end use date. So, but what did both get? How did both take advantage of this at the time?
Well, mainly land. Both of them wanted land. But Hitler wanted to invade. The problem being was that he wasn't sure that if he invaded Poland and took the land that he wanted, would the Soviet Union invade also and save the Poles or whatever. So when he does this pact, he knows for sure with the secret protocol that he will get what he wants at the end of the day. So he's going to get that land, and Russia, Soviet Union is not going to be a threat to him. They're going to be an ally. They're going to help him. So that's number one. Number two, I mentioned before, was natural resources. That's what they really need to be able to continue their arms productions and things like that. They desperately need that. And also security. But at the end of the day, we know 3 years' time.
Yes, they're both.
It all goes out the window.
We'll have a talk about the effects of that 1939 pact and also the historiography from the great powers.
I didn't want to jump ahead of myself exactly, so I stopped right there where I did, just so I wouldn't jump ahead of myself.
We'll have a look at our second clip in the meantime.
On the surface, the Ribbentrop Pact, signed on August 1939, presented itself as a simple non-aggression treaty between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Hidden between the lines, however, was a secret protocol dividing Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence, a clause that ultimately sealed Poland's fate. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, kicking off World War II. Just 17 days later, the Red Army poured into Poland from the east, an invasion disguised as an action protecting Ukrainian and Belarusian minorities after the supposed collapse of the Polish state. Faced with an onslaught on two fronts, Poland fell by the end of September, its territory partitioned between Berlin and Moscow. Soviet crimes against the Polish people didn't stop there, however. In the war's second year, 1940, Soviet forces executed over 20,000 Polish officers, intellectuals, and officials, often with a shot to the back of their heads, their bodies buried in mass graves. The monstrous transgression, known as the Katyn massacre, was an effort aimed at erasing Poland's leadership class and crushing any thought of resistance. For decades, the Soviet Union denied responsibility, shifting the blame to their former allies, the Nazis, even after evidence to the contrary mounted. Yet the most enduring denial concerned the war's very beginning, when Adolf Hitler's ambition to rule the world led to the German invasion of Russia in 1941. Moscow cast itself as a victim, dragged into the World War. Soviet propaganda claimed the USSR's involvement in the war began only then, casting a shadow on Russia's invasion of Poland, occupation of the Baltic states, and failed invasion of Finland, years and months prior to Germany's betrayal. This narrative endured for decades, shaping the public perception of the Soviet Union long after the war had ended. But the pages of history hold no lies. The USSR was not a passive onlooker before 1941, but a driving force in the war, engaged in the conflict since its third week.
I think we need to mention that it wasn't just Poland. I think we did that there momentarily, but it wasn't just Poland. It was a huge land grab. The Baltics, Bessarabia, parts of Finland, they were all on the map. But why did Russia regard 1941 as the start of the war? What was the rationale? How did it justify these movements from 1939 to 1941?
This is something that our lovely friend Putin likes to repeat a lot, is that they took this land to liberate the minorities, because the Belarusians, the Ukrainians... Well, yeah, well, this is it. I mean, they're doing this right now. So, but they're liberating these nations who have been oppressed by the Poles, who have been, putting them into the ground and forgetting about them and treating them like garbage. That's the reason they invaded. It's really interesting because they do make propaganda video footage, I think it's in 1940, where they talk about that. And they talk about the Polish gentry and things like that, and how they've liberated these poor innocent souls. So, and they show obviously Lithuanians and Belarusians celebrating as they enter the towns and cities. But we all know that's just garbage.
Well, we all know, but it's almost an article of faith in the Russia of today, isn't it? That you can't criticise the policy.
It's true. I actually did a talk a couple of years ago where I spoke about the invasion of Poland by the Soviets, and one of the people says, well, no, there was no invasion. You were oppressing minorities. And I said, I'm sorry, what? So this narrative that is being spewed by Russia now is still going into the cracks, and people are believing this.
The 1941, Russia is invaded by erstwhile ally, and the Grand Alliance is formed. What irritates me about this organisation is that it's just as cynical as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Two incompatible systems. We do it on the basis of mutual interest, and Stalin becomes Uncle Joe. So tell us how he becomes Uncle Joe from Katyn Forest, invasion of Eastern Europe in 1939.
Well,
how does he make that transition?
They're denying Katyn. It wasn't them, it was the Germans, right? So that narrative goes all the way through to 89. So let's establish that first of all. So everybody believes it was the Germans, it was never the Soviets, and eventually they admit it. I think it is 89, I think, off the top of my head. My brain is dying here at the moment. But otherwise, this alliance, Uncle Joe, he's so charming and he's so lovely, and he whittles his way into the Allies and gets what he wants at the end of the day, especially in Tehran. And the media doesn't help. Of course, we're in the media now, we're telling the truth, but the media at the end, especially in America, prints about how he is Uncle Joe. He is this nice guy who's helping us out to defeat the Nazis, to become victorious, and they're coming in from the east and they're going to help liberate everything that has been occupied by the Nazis. Of course, we know the reality, that's not what happens. But this is the narrative that they're pushing out in America, and people are believing it. And he does become Uncle Joe all the way through until 1945, when again he becomes the bad guy.
And what, why was it so shocking that both the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact and the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, why was that so shocking to the Western communists, or fellow travellers, left-wingers? Why was this, was the pact such an ideological earthquake?
It's a betrayal.
Yeah.
It's a betrayal. How dare the communists make a pact with the fascists, especially in the media. There were a couple of suicides by communists who did it in protests of how dare you make a pact. It was a really powerful thing that happened to these people. They're sensing this sense of betrayal. They don't know what to do with themselves. They're publishing about it in the media, in the newspapers and things like that, and it's shocking. Like, why are you doing this? They are everything even though we know this, that they're very similar, but at the end of the day, towards the communists, they are completely the opposite. And it's quite traumatic. It becomes very traumatic for these people.
And there's we've touched on this idea of the amnesia, selective amnesia about historical accuracy. Try and steer away from the word truth, but it's accuracy. It's what actually happened. The Western Allies had it. The Russians had it. What do the German historians today say about the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact? Do they try and sweep it under the carpet, pretend it doesn't exist, or just give it a cursory mention in the history books?
It's changing. It's changing a lot, especially in Germany, especially amongst politicians. Well, except for certain politicians, but the others are starting to understand and talk about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and they are becoming more honest, especially if you look on social media. It's changing amongst the Germans, that they do acknowledge and understand what it was all about. But if we look at it on the flip side, Putin, he is just a whole other kettle of fish. So
he's actually destroyed this great vision.
Yes.
of what the West has about the Second World War.
So on social media, they keep pushing this narrative that you know, social media is the easiest way to get information out. He's pushing this narrative that we had no choice. We had no choice to but ally to Germany because everybody was allying with other people. And then they make this long list of who made pacts with who. So Poland makes a pact with Britain, Poland makes a pact with Germany at a certain point as well, and everything else. And they're like, but we're so surrounded, and you know, Poland was making all of these, but we just didn't know what to do. So, sorry that I'm using that voice, but that is what it sounds like. Woe is me. You know, we had no choice. We were forced into it. Our hands were forced. It's ridiculous. You know, you had an ideology, you knew what you wanted, and you went and got it. Just admit it. The Germans are doing it. Why can't you?
Why do we believe in a kind of an essential goodness of international politics? People make these strange bedfellows get into the same bed. Ideological enemies make all temporary alliance. All alliances are temporary. Even NATO, for example, 27. I'm not making a direct comparison between the two, but NATO, any organisation such as an alliance is a finite organisation. Why should we be so shocked when seemingly incompatible allies get together?
Gosh, you've given me a difficult question. I think I'm a bit stumped for the first time. I think that alliances can be broken, first of all, so we shouldn't be surprised when they are broken. Alliances are never fulfilled, and we've seen this throughout the whole of history. I mean, you know, pushing back to the 1600s, even earlier,
yes,
where
quite.
Pacts and alliances they just break because of a disagreement.
Internal contradictions.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I don't think we should be surprised, because even in relationships, people, the oddest couples come together.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, it's a human thing. They have something we want, you have something I want. Well, why don't we get together and do it at the end of the day? But there are people, obviously, who are heavily ideologically rooted, as we mentioned on the communists, who were just completely and utterly devastated at the same time. So I think, I don't know, does that really answer the question?
I suppose you could say that a more modern comparison would be Nixon going to China and trying to outflank.
Or do you know another one would be
two systems.
Mao and Stalin, or Mao and Khrushchev is another one. Gosh, that was two communist regimes going at each other with two completely different visions. I think I wrote that, actually, funny enough, at university, an article about that, which is very interesting. Anybody's interested, go and look at that. That between Khrushchev and Mao. I know this is not our subject, but Khrushchev and Mao, that was a clash, a very big one.
But it seems that historians have got this idea that this is some sort of diabolical, devilish pact, which, when you look at the longer version of history, it was one of a series of, fairly normal things to do.
It is, but it's not
if you're the victim of it, then it's a terrible thing, like Poland and Eastern Europe.
I think it's the secret protocol is what's done it. Because obviously people didn't know really about the secret protocol till later, and I think that is what made it far more diabolical, because it was all done in secret, and then one country, and plus also the Baltic states eventually, Ukraine and Belarus, all disappeared off the map.
Yeah. A final question to you, Alina. We talked about the historiography, but just to round up the discussion, what's the stance of, say, the Western allies, the Western historian, towards the early part of the Second World War? And we'll take Second World War starting in 1939 in Poland. And that's probably a moot point.
We've talked about this before here on the show, so I'm going to repeat it all over again. So, for example, if you look at historians like Anthony Beevor, who, by the way, I respect very much, this is not me putting him down. If you look at his book, he says, so Poland got invaded by the Germans. ... Okay, so where is the Soviet invasion? Where is talking about the invasion of Poland? So when you look at these history books, like Anthony Beevor's, especially popular history, actually even academia at the end of the day, they start with the Germans invaded Poland, and that's it. And they don't talk about what happens when the Russians involved. It's just like Russia gets wiped off and wiped out of historiography. Is it because this is what people know? Is it because Russia's very good at pushing its propaganda, which we very well know? I don't know what it is. Or is it just the lack of knowledge? And I'd bet on that it was the lack of knowledge, because that's all we know. And the other thing I just wanted to add before we finish, Poland hasn't had a chance to talk about our history. You know, we underwent communism for 40 years.
Yes.
We haven't been able to talk about concentration camps, Poles in concentration camps, Palmyra, for example, the murders, Katyn in itself. We haven't been able to defend ourselves. So at the end of the day, where can we fit into this historiography?
Yes. I suppose Poland has to talk louder to be heard, or shout even louder to be heard at the historians' table, rather
but
than just...
unfortunately, we very well know this. The louder we shout, the more we're shouted down, because you don't have the right to talk about your history. Anyway, calm.
Alina Nowobilska, thank you very much for coming onto the programme.
Thank you so much.
Great to have you. That's it. So that's all we have time for today. Do join us in September, where we are back to our old time of 35 minutes past 9, 21:35 CET. See you then.